Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going into NCAA Game Simulator and we're going to be simulating the whole NCAA tournament to see who's going to be the champion. So let's get right into it. So NCAA Game Simulator is this really cool website where you can go and you can simulate almost any NCAA basketball game you can think of. So here we are for the tournament. We're going to go game by game. We're going to simulate each first round and I'm going to input it into the ESPN Tournament Challenge until we have a champion. Okay, let's get right into it. First off, we got number 1 Alabama versus the 16th seed. For this one, I'm just going to pick Alabama because either way, we're going to have to simulate, and Bama's probably going to win that game. So we're just going to put them through right away. So we can get right into the next matchup now. Number 8 Maryland versus number 9 West Virginia. Let's simulate it. And as you can see, West Virginia takes this one, although Maryland did score more points usually. And if you look here, you can look at the amount of simulations it does and how many overtimes it was and how many times each team won. So Maryland actually won more times, but in this particular matchup, West Virginia won. So we're going to put West Virginia through. On to the next matchup. Next up, we got San Diego State versus Charleston. So in this next matchup, it has San Diego State winning over Charleston 86-73. So we're going to put San Diego State through. So next up, we got Virginia versus Furman, and it looks like Furman's going to pull off the upset here. Let's put them through. Next matchup is Creighton versus NC State, and Creighton's going to win handily over NC State, although the total points average for the games was pretty close. Creighton wins this game handily. Alright, next up we got Baylor versus UC Santa Barbara, and Baylor's going to win this game by 10. Okay, next up we got the 7 versus 10 seed, Missouri versus Utah State, and Missouri wins this one, although Utah State did average more points totally. And the final first round game of the South region, we got the 2 seed versus the 15 seed, Arizona versus Princeton. And we have another upset. Princeton's going to beat Arizona here. Wow. Now what we're going to do is we're going to finish the South regional and see who's going to be the champion of the South. So the first matchup we have is Alabama versus West Virginia. And West Virginia is going to pull off the upset, even though I do think Alabama might win the tournament. But West Virginia is going to win in the second round. On to the next matchup. So in the second round here, we got San Diego State versus Furman, and San Diego State's going to put Furman down. Next up, we got Creighton versus Baylor, and Baylor's going to blow out Creighton to move on to the next round. And now we got a matchup between the Tigers, and Missouri's going to win. Put them through. On to the third round. First matchup we got is West Virginia versus San Diego State. So here we got the 9 seed West Virginia versus number 5 seed San Diego State. And West Virginia is going to pull off another upset. This is crazy. Now on to Baylor versus Missouri. And in the matchup of Baylor versus Missouri, Baylor's going to win this game. And let's put them through the next round. Now we got the last matchup of the South region, West Virginia versus Baylor. A Big 12 matchup. And the team that will be moving on to the Final Four is West Virginia. They pull off another upset. This is insane. So West Virginia, the first team to move to the Final Four. Let's move on to the next region. Okay, in the first game of this next region, we got the 1 seed versus the 16 seed, and oh boy. The 16th seed, Northern Kentucky, is going to beat Houston. Well, we gotta do what the simulator says. So 16 seed moves on for the second time in the history of the tournament. Next up, we got the 5 versus the 12 seed, Miami versus Drake, and Miami's gonna blow Drake out. Although I think in real life, it's gonna be a close game. Let's put Miami through. Next up is Indiana versus Kent State, and once again a blowout. Although I do think Kent State is gonna be able to make it a really close game, if not win. They're a really good team, and well, they lose this one. Indiana moves on to the next round. And in this next matchup, we have the 6 versus the 11 seed, but the 11 seed has a play-in game. So I just picked one of the teams, and Iowa State's going to beat Mississippi State. Let's put them through the next round. Next up, we have Xavier versus Kennesaw State, and Xavier's going to handily beat Kennesaw State. So the next game we have up is Texas A&M versus Penn State, and Penn State's going to beat Texas A&M. 10 seed moves on. And in the final matchup of the first round of this Midwest region, Colgate's going to pull off the big upset over Texas. They obliterated them. Colgate moves on. So in both 15 seeds move on to the second round. Now the simulation of Iowa versus Northern Kentucky, and Northern Kentucky loses by 3. Almost pulls off another upset, but Iowa moves on. And in the matchup of Miami and Indiana, Miami scores 102 and beats Indiana by a lot. Miami moves on. Next game we have is Iowa State versus Xavier, and Iowa State pulls off the upset. Iowa State moves on. And next up is a match between 10 and 15 seed, and Penn State beats Colgate pretty handily. They move on. In this next matchup, we have Iowa and Miami, and it goes to overtime, and Iowa beats Miami by 3. Iowa moves on. Will we get an Iowa State versus Iowa matchup? We'll find out soon. And it looks like Penn State wins by 1 point to spoil the potential rivalry game. Penn State moves on to play Iowa in a Big Ten matchup. We had a Big 12 matchup over here, Big Ten matchup this side. Let's see who wins and moves on to the Final Four. And the winner is Iowa. Iowa beats Penn State by 2. We've had some close games recently, so Iowa moves on to the Final Four. And we have a 9 seed and an 8 seed in the Final Four. Let's move on to the next region. For the first game in the East region, we have Purdue versus Fairleigh Dickinson. I've put Fairleigh Dickinson in there over Texas Southern just because they have a better record, and Purdue beats them anyway. Purdue moves on. And in the next matchup of the 8 versus 9 seed, Florida Atlantic beats Memphis by 12 to move on. And now we have Duke versus Oral Roberts, and Duke wins. They move on to the next round. Okay, and for this next matchup, it doesn't look like Louisiana is on the list anywhere here. And so the NCAA game simulator put University of Lafayette there instead, and they pulled off the upset by 1 point. And so we're going to put Louisiana through. I think that's a game that could really be an upset for Louisiana. Next up, we got Kentucky versus Providence. Kentucky's going to take care of business and move on to the next round. Now we have Kansas State versus Montana State. Kansas State's going to win. Move on to the next round. Next matchup is Michigan State versus USC, and USC is going to beat the 7 seed. They move on. Now will Vermont continue the trend of 15 seeds winning, or will Marquette spoil their hopes? And Marquette beats Vermont to be the first 2 seed to move on. Let's move on to the next round. And in the first game of the second round, Purdue beats Florida Atlantic to move on. And now in the game of Duke versus Louisiana, or Louisiana Lafayette, Duke's going to beat them anyway. So Duke will move on to the next round. And now in the game of the 6 versus the 3 seed, Kansas State's going to beat Kentucky by 18 points to move on to the next round. And then this next game, USC is going to pull off the upset, and they're going to move on to the next round by 3 points. This is probably the most normal region we've had so far. Let's see if the trend continues and see if Purdue can move on to the next round. And Purdue beats Duke by 3 points. Purdue moves on to the next round, and they are the first 1 seed to make it this far. And in the matchup of Kansas State versus USC, Kansas State's going to win, and they're going to play Purdue in the game to go to the Final Four. Let's see who wins. And looks like Purdue is going to beat Kansas State to be the first 1 seed to move on to the Final Four. They're going to play West Virginia. Let's move on to the next region. I really like this NCAA game simulator. It's really fun, and there's endless possibilities of what you can do. And in this first game of the next regional, we have Kansas beating Howard to move on to the next round. And in this game, Arkansas is going to beat Illinois to move on to the next round. And now we have St. Mary's versus VCU. St. Mary's is going to win by 1 point, avoiding the upset. Next up is UConn versus Iona, and if Iona wins, we're going to have a Gale versus Gale matchup for the mascots. And it looks like UConn's going to spoil our hopes of that matchup, and they're going to move on to play St. Mary's. And now for this next matchup, it's the 6 versus an 11 seed, but the 11 seed has a play-in, and so I just chose the 11 seed that I thought might do better. And it looks like they won. Arizona State wins, and they move on to the next round. Now we have 3 versus 14 seed, Gonzaga versus Grand Canyon, and Grand Canyon almost spoils Gonzaga's hopes of of a championship, but Gonzaga barely wins by 1 point. They move on to the next round. Now we have 7 versus 10 seed Northwestern versus Boise State, and Boise State's going to win by 18 points to move on to the next round. And when the 2 versus 15 seed matchup, UCLA is going to beat UNC Asheville, and the 2 seed moves on. And so 2 seeds versus 15 seeds were 50-50, which is kind of surprising. And we have looks like another somewhat normal regional here. Now Kansas versus Arkansas, and Arkansas is going to destroy Kansas, and they're going to move on to the next round. So right when I said a somewhat normal region, the 8 seed upsets the 1 seed. And so now we got St. Mary's versus UConn, and St. Mary's is going to win and move on to the next round. And now we have that 11 seed play-in game team, Arizona State versus Gonzaga, and Gonzaga is going to beat Arizona State. Now we got Boise State versus UCLA, and Boise State's going to upset UCLA and move on to the next round. And now Arkansas versus St. Mary's, and St. Mary's is going to win another game, and they're going to move on to this matchup to see if they can go to the Final Four. Will they face their rival Gonzaga, or will Boise State spoil their hopes? And we're going to get a 4th matchup between Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and now we'll see who moves on to the Final Four. And so St. Mary's beats Gonzaga by a lot to move on to the Final Four. So they're going to play Iowa. And now let's move on to these Final Four games. Okay, the first matchup we got is number 9 West Virginia versus number 1 Purdue. So let's see who wins. And in this game, West Virginia's Cinderella hopes end here. Purdue's going to move on to the national championship game. Let's see who they're going to play. Now we got Iowa versus St. Mary's, and Iowa's going to beat St. Mary's by 30 points. And so we're going to get a Big Ten matchup in the national championship game. Number 1 Purdue versus number 8 Iowa. Let's see who takes home the gold. And it looks like it's going to be Iowa. Iowa upsets Purdue, and they win the championship game. Wow, I did not see that coming. So it looks like Iowa is going to be your national champions, according to NCAAGameSimulator.com. So go check out this website. There's so many more things you can do than just simulating the NCAA tournament. There's basketball, there's football, there's NBA, NFL, MLB, and so much more. So go check it out. And so thank you for watching, and see you next time.